within the vessels, right? So there is intravascular and what? And what is extravascular? Splenic, right. So you always want to think of diseases that may cause intravascular hemolysis as well, such as what in horses? Okay, this goes back to parasitology, which I'm afraid might not be. Like babesia can cause that. Thank God. Did y'all do babesia? Okay, have you done red maple toxicosis yet?
We heard about that. What's the toxicology?
Oh, Lord.
Right, we're on it right now.
We own it, right? Okay.
We're doing plants right now.
Okay, so okay, let's keep going. Microbinuria. Ooh-wee.
Dr. Cassidy,
Yes.
was the red maple leaf, was that another differential for?
Yes, it would be. More for, if we're talking about hemoglobinuria, so red maple leaf, and when she talks about that, she will talk to you. But the myoglobinuria has more of a dark tinge appearance to it, and usually you see that with some sort of muscle degeneration, muscle loss. So initially, if you do a necropsy on these animals where it just occurred, you usually have a salmon pink kind of color, and then later it becomes dark red, moist, and really has the appearance of blackleg. You can get to that extreme. And what we see microscopically would be the same, which is muscle degeneration and necrosis. I typically do not give a gross image of this for a very specific reason. Salmon color could be one thing for me, and then something Victor could like, that's not salmon, that's more, I guess close to salmon. Coral, and then we have a huge issue where we don't know what we're looking at. So, it's all perception. I had a huge argument. See, y'all start arguing with Dr. Gorb and I. He said he's been teaching this for 30-something years, and he's gonna keep telling y'all to learn severe, and I said, that's all subjective. But again, that argument is, this is my class, so we're gonna go my way. It is subjective. You may think something is severe. As I said, I could think it's salmon, you could think it's coral, and then I can't persuade someone that something is salmon when it looks like coral to them. Okay, so we're behind in our game, so we're gonna play our game right now. Yay, we take a little break. Let's see, what time is it? I'm on time, yes. So, the first person is from Charlotte, North Carolina. Who? I once thought I would move there. Attended North Carolina State University. And has been to Freaknik. So, which says I preached in Atlanta. So, I'm not sure how old this person is, because when I was in college, that was what people went to, Freaknik in Atlanta. And based on my thought of y'all's age, probably was like 10 when you were talking. So, okay. So, and everybody guess who this is? All right, Cameron. So, how old were you when you were in Freaknik?
I was actually a small toddler.
Oh, I'm worried about your parents.
I was serving as a wingman.
I think that's even worse. Anyway, I love this picture. And I don't know who your friend is, but yeah. That's not your dog, is it?
No.
Oh, okay. Ooh, jeez. All right. Next, I've never met someone in your generation that I've been to Freaknik. All right. So the next person is from Atlanta, Georgia. I was waiting. I haven't heard. I missed your laugh. I didn't like videotape you. When I'm feeling like really upset, I just gotta press the button. Attended Georgia Southern University. Oh boy. And loves karaoke. So what happens at karaoke stays at karaoke. So can anybody guess who this is? So, you know, when I saw him dancing once, and now I have a completely, you are quite awesome, karaoke dance. I mean, really, because I just see you're very quiet, studious. I like it. You're balanced. It's good. So during graduation, I'm going to remind you. I'll let you. I'll forget by then, hopefully. All right. I like it. All right. The last person is from Baymon, Puerto Rico. I couldn't find a picture of Baymon. What kind of bad? I'm not sure what's happening here. Okay. And attended UPR in Puerto Rico. And eats Nutella directly from the bottle with the banana. Good grief. I don't think I've ever had Nutella. Maybe it's good. So maybe I should start.
It's not bad.
It's not good for you?
Well, no, it's not good for you, but it's just lying. You're sorry.
Oh.
I'm just not a fan of put it on a waffle with a banana.
Put it on a waffle with a banana. Okay, I'm gonna try it. So can anybody guess who this is? Oh, that's funny. Fabulous, yeah. I'm loving the dress. And yeah, I'm loading. Love it. Nutella with a banana. Okay.
You've never had peanut butter with banana?
Not peanut butter, yes, but Nutella. What is Nutella, like chocolate?
It's hazelnut.
Hazelnut.
Pretty sure that's not
going on at all.
If you ever had like the Ferrero Rochers, that's
Yes, it looks like that. Well, no, I'm
it's the
not.
stuff in the middle. See?
It's the stuff in the middle. Oh, now I understand. Ooh, how do you say so well? Where is she? Where are you? Oh, there you are. How do you stay in shape? You eat all this Nutella. You work out, I hope. All right, so we're going to look at a few parasitic diseases. So you should have had these. The first one is sarcocystitis, and we kind of know about sarcocystitis. As I said, we see muscle fibers a lot in ruminants. My intern gets very excited, and I'm like, oh, this sarcocystitis. Because it usually just sits in the muscle, there's no inflammation, there are no clinical signs. It's an incidental finding. And we see it in the tongue, heart, esophagus, diaphragm, all different muscles in these species. If we do see it grossly, it's going to be a pretty severe infestation where we see these white dots or white streaks within the muscle. So these are your sarcocyst organisms, and that's usually where you have a really high infection. And what they look like microscopically, we kind of say that they're spindle-shaped organisms. They're surrounded by a thick cyst. So this is buffalo. So I couldn't even find a regular species with sarcocystitis. Not the same, buffalo is not a regular species, but you know what I mean. So this is the diaphragm of the buffalo. And you have these large streaks, which are not just one, obviously, hundreds of sarcocyst organisms sort of seen microscopically when you look at it microscopically. For something like this, your morph would be, muscular sarcocystitis or something like that, because there's no inflammation, so it's not a myositis. So remember that sarcocyst is just incidental, sort of like when we talked about, what was that disease? The one with the fat.
What's the cause?
Steatosis?
Steatosis, thank you. perhaps time when I'm teaching. So just really not a huge problem. And this is what they look like microscopically. They sort of have a cigar-shaped appearance. And as you see, there's no inflammation associated with it. So here's this one, like a little, like a creepy organism. And the muscle is not affected by it at all. Now Trichinella, that's a whole different story. Trichinella spiralis affects multiple species, and it affects people. So who likes eating raw food, raw meat? Holy Bonnie, no. I'm not even touching sushi, y'all. I'm paranoid, but that's just me. But you have to be careful. I mean, sushi is different. Whole different story. But this is talking mostly about pigs and pork and.
No one should eat raw pork.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm saying. But we said sushi. Sushi is fine. Still not.
So like medium rare steak.
My steak should be rare.
What now?
My steak should be rare.
You like rare steak?
She likes it straight off the cutboard.
Oh my God, mooing still talking to you? Okay. Dr. Gordon can hang. Dr. Gordon loves sushi and he loves his bloody meat. He's a weird. He's not saying you're weird. He is. Okay, I'm stop talking. So it has affinity for active muscles, such as the tongue, the masseters, areas that we typically, the animal will use a lot. A lot of people have died from this disease, so that's why I said I want everything cooked till like it can't be cooked any longer. Obviously not burnt. So this is what it looks like microscopically. So as you can see, compared to Sarcocystis, you have tons of inflammation. There's inflammation surrounding these organisms. So here are your organisms within myofibers, and we have inflammation associated with it. And here's another one, nice little some lymphocytic inflammation. You may have eosinophilic inflammation depending on the stage or where it's progressing. Okay, any questions about that? So those are two of the important muscle parasites that are important that you should be aware of. All right. The next disease is not obviously under parasites. It's again really non-specific, but it's secondary to a combination of things that these pigs may have or undergo, and it's called porcine stress syndrome, also known as malignant hyperthermia. And as the name suggests, one of the clinical presentations, we see increased body temperature in these animals, also known as pale, soft, exudative myositis, because the muscle, when they look at it grossly, is soft and exudative, sort of squishy on palpation. Squishy is not a scientific word. I'm sure it's soft and malleable or whatever better term. So there are three things they have associated with it. A mutation in the halothane gene, which is the area in that gene is the ryanodine receptor gene RYR1. So there's a mutation or a defect in that specific gene. And then the animal is undergoing a lot of stress, and they may be put under anesthesia using halothane. Now, as you know, who uses halothane? They don't use that anymore. So a lot of these cases, we usually see these in pigs that are undergoing a lot of stress, and they have this genetic defect. So, what does it look like grossly? So what area of the pig is this?
The spine.
Okay,
The
lumbar area, all right. And so we have muscle, I was waiting for somebody to say pork chop. Come on now. But we may have some people who, that might, I don't want to offend anyone. But when I look at this, I think of dinner. I said that to my daughter. My daughter's 8, and she's just like horrified by. Okay, sorry. So when you palpate the muscle, it's usually soft and very soft and squishy. That's the best way. I've had one case of this, and this was during my residency, and the pig presented. It was being sent to the factory and to be processed, and the animal just collapsed. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. So when we did a necropsy, the muscles in the back were very soft and necrotic in texture. Okay. Oops. The reason I don't have a lot on this disease is, again, it's the way they process pigs right now is that they make sure that this genetic defect is not part of the breeding cycle. So we're not going to really go in depth with it. Now, the final part of the muscular system is... Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
sorry, I have a question about
Yes.
the last slide.
Mm-hmm.
Is it usually seen in the back area, or can it be found?
It can be found
predominantly-
anywhere, but I think it's because those are your most prominent muscles in pig. A lot of times that might be where it's seen. But it's a genetic defect, so it can really be found anywhere in the muscle. Any muscle on the body. Alright, so we're going to briefly go through neoplasia. We talked about melanomas in gray horses, and we can see that within the muscle itself. So this would be a melanoma. And as you can see, multiple small nodules with that dark pigmented mass. Most likely this is near a lymph node that has been infiltrated with the neoplastic cells. Lipomas, so those are fatty masses so they don't develop from muscle, as you know they develop from fat, but they can compress surrounding muscle. So this is the limb from a dog with a pretty significant size lipomas. So as you can see, this mass, if it was small, it would typically not affect the animal, but as it gets larger and larger, it's going to cause muscle atrophy and loss to any surrounding tissue. This is a liposarcoma. Those are not as common as lipomas, and they're malignant neoplasia that originate from an adipose tissue. This is a rhabdomyosarcoma. Typically, on gross presentation, it's hard for us to differentiate the two. And looking at this, I can't tell heads or tails of what is what. Obviously, these are all neoplastic cell masses, but then there's some muscle intertwined in there, and bone. It just looks a mess. And leiomyomas, also known as uterine fibroids in women. So these are benign tumors, and they originate from what types of cells? Smooth muscle. Very good. So it always interests me when you go to, as you get older, you go to the doctor, you have fibroids, and if you're not in the medical field, you just thought it was just nothing, but it's actually a tumor. Yes, it's benign, and they do get enlarged, and they can cause secondary effects depending on the size of the mass. Was it this class that brought me a leiomyoma? No, it wasn't. It was another class. They were in first year, and they were doing their dissection on their pony, and they did the uterus, and they found the tumor. I was like on the a leiomyoma in the uterus of the anatomy pony. Yeah. Okay. All right. And this is what leiomyoma would look like. Remember, it's spindle cell in origin, it's benign. The only issue they may cause is that they increase in size and can cause compression to the surrounding tissue. Right, quick review. We talked about from the beginning, we talked about We talked about the eosinophilic myositis, both in cattle and dogs. Remembering dogs, what breed is affected? German Shepherds, and they usually present with open mouth. They may have initially swelling of the face and then atrophy. And 4 minutes. Let's see, I'm gonna talk even faster. Yes, and it's a relapsing disease, so they can have it and then it can relapse and go back and forth. We also talked about white muscle disease. We know the etiology is vitamin E and selenium and presents with necrosis and fibrosis of the muscle. We also talked about equine rhabdomyolysis, where also known as Monday morning disease, and we see more myoglobinuria, stiffness of the muscle, dark sort of coloration, especially of the muscle. We looked at some parasites, sarcoidosis and trichinella. I found out Imani likes sushi, so that's an important thing to know as well. There you go. We talked a little bit about porcine stress syndrome associated with a halothane gene mutation in combination of stress and the use of halothane anesthesia, which we don't do anymore. And we recapped about some neoplasia that you should have really got last year. So melanomas, leiomyomas, leiomyosarcomas, and rhabdomyomas and leiosarcomas. And I have 2 minutes to spare. Yay! Any questions? Yes?
So how would you change the diet in equine rhabdomyolysis? Like, what does that mean? You don't restrict the food? Like, you don't change the type of food, or you don't feed them less?
So you don't, it's kind of, I always compare it to just vegging out for a weekend. Not restricting the food to a unreasonable amount, but just